My name is Mandy Jane Stanley, and I'm the owner of Pathways Learning Solutions, a consulting company that focuses on building a world that is intentional about meeting the needs of all. I'm a firm believer that by helping the few, you benefit the whole, specifically in the classroom, but especially in the world around us. Whether you're a teacher, parent, student teacher, or administrator, or a part of a business or an organization, or just someone who loves to be a lifelong learner, welcome to my classroom. After completing this course, you'll be more informed on how to do the following: defining accommodations versus modifications, finding examples of accommodations and modifications for various tasks and subjects. We'll also discuss ways to document usage as well as how to openly communicate with parents and caregivers when accommodations and modifications are used on assignments and tests in the classroom. So, let's get started. Teachers, there's no greater feeling than teaching a lesson and seeing the looks of pride on your students' faces when they master that new skill. But as Shelley Moore of the University of British Columbia suggests, teaching can feel like bowling. We do our best to knock down all the pins, but knocking down the ones in the margins, which would be our higher or lower achieving students, can feel like it's the hardest thing in the world. We never want to leave our students in the margins behind. Understanding how to select and implement accommodations and modifications can help us avoid this hardship. We need to be proactive planners and not reactive planners. Let's discuss what an accommodation really is. So there are two different types of accommodations that we'll discuss in this module. There are instructional accommodations, and there are also testing accommodations. But before we can really dive into those, we'll need to discuss target skills and access skills. A target skill is a specific knowledge or skill that is being assessed. For example, a reading comprehension, long division, scientific method, or a World War II test. Although you are testing the student on those skills or certain content areas, there are certain access skills they need to have mastered in order to remove barriers that can prevent them from understanding and showing you what they truly know about reading comprehension, long division, the scientific method, or World War II. These access skills that can cause a barrier include writing, reading accuracy, spelling, time, pacing, and organization, or even math fact fluency. If the student doesn't have these skills mastered, you can see how showing you whether or not they have a good understanding of the target skill could be an issue. Here's an example. Olivia's history teacher gave her a test on the American Revolution. She's failed the last two tests and barely passed the others. Olivia struggles with reading fluency and with written expression due to the disorientation that comes along with having dyslexia. But her teacher doesn't understand why this is impacting her test scores, especially since she's very active during class discussions. Do you see how her difficulty with the access skills of reading fluency and written expression are adversely impacting her test scores in history? Sometimes something as simple as having the test read aloud to her or allowing her to use speech to text to write out her essay questions could really positively impact her grades and confidence. If a child struggles with the foundational access skill, make sure that you do your best to remove any barriers that may negatively impact their ability to demonstrate their understanding of target skills. Now, let's discuss instructional accommodations. According to the IRIS Center, instructional accommodations are changes to the delivery of classroom instruction or the accompanying materials. Instructional accommodations change how students learn, but they do not change what they learn. They don't alter scope or range or academic standards. They don't alter complexity level of academic standards, and they aren't always the same across all classes and content. The easiest way to remember it is to say to yourself, same content plus same complexity equals instructional accommodations. Now let's talk about testing accommodations. According to the IRIS Center, testing accommodations are changes to the format of a test, for example, providing a test in large print, or its administration procedures, for example, permitting extended time to complete the test. Testing accommodations change how students are tested, but they don't change what the testing measure is. Testing accommodations don't alter scope or range or academic standards, and they don't alter the complexity level of academic standards. And they aren't always the same across all classes, just like the others. In other words, you have the same test plus the same required level of proficiency, and that'll equal your testing accommodations. Now let's discuss some common instructional accommodations. Some examples would be checking for understanding, chunking assignments into smaller parts, verbal prompts and visual cues that will help maintain focus, repeating or rephrasing instructions, using an agenda or a planner if they struggle with executive functioning, retaking tests and quizzes, additional wait time for oral questions, graphic organizers and semantic maps, shortening assignments, giving them extended time, math fact tables or calculators, typing or using speech to text or text to speech, reminders to slow down. Some kids just fly through things and make careless errors, so they do need those reminders to slow down. Giving them a copy of the notes, or you could give them notes that have blanks where they have to write in important details or important terms. Short breaks after they've shown you that they've completed things when you've chunked the assignments for them, as well as preferential seating closer to the teacher and away from distractions or high traffic areas, like please don't sit students who get easily distracted by the pencil sharpener. Yeah, they're gonna get easily distracted. Now let's discuss some common testing accommodations. Those would include providing an alternate testing location in an area that's maybe smaller with supervision, of course, but has fewer distractions. You can read the test aloud to the student as long as it's not a fluency-based assessment. You can provide a multiplication table or a calculator as long as you are not assessing being able to recall multiplication facts or some other fact. Utilizing text-to-speech or speech-to-text. If a student has fine motor difficulties, you can also scribe for them. That means that you would actually write out their answers that they give to you orally. You can also accept oral responses. Orally, ask the exact same questions, but they have to just share what they know verbally. And you can also provide extended time for those who struggle with time management. So let's review. Instructional accommodations don't alter scope or range of academic standards, and they don't alter the complexity level of an academic standard. They also aren't always the same across all classes and content areas. Testing accommodations don't alter the scope or range of academic standards. They don't alter the complexity level of the academic standards, and they aren't always the same across all content classes. In other words, you have the same test and the same required level of proficiency, and that provides just an accommodation. Take some time to review the additional resources provided. Now that we've discussed accommodations, let's focus on modifications. According to the IRIS Center, a modification is a change to the instruction or curriculum for a student in which the content of the instruction or the performance expectations are altered. Modifications are useful for students for whom all possible accommodations have been considered, but who require additional measures to help them progress in the general education curriculum. To put it plainly, modifications allow students to progress through the general education curriculum at their own level. Instructional and testing modifications alter the scope or range of academic standards, as well as alter the complexity level of the academic standards. In addition to altering the scope, range, and complexity level of the academic standards, they aren't always the same across all classes, just like accommodations. So for example, just because a student needs curriculum modifications in mathematics does not mean that he or she will automatically need them in literature. You can make modifications to the overall curriculum, certain aspects of the curriculum, or even on assessments. Just remember, A modification is when you have a different test and a different level of proficiency. Allow me to share some common testing and instructional modifications. The first would be to reduce assignments in length. You can require a student to write 1 or 2 paragraphs instead of several pages for an essay. Another would be to carry different levels of reading material in your literature classes. So students in a class might read literature at different levels. They'll all learn to identify character development, plot, and voice. You can also try designing new material, projects, and assessments by adjusting the curriculum altogether. This is also needed for some students. So this, for example, might look like tasks that might mirror the general education curriculum, but they vary in difficulty or depth. For example, all students might receive math instruction, but some would study basic algebra while others solve simple word problems, which in a way is algebraic thinking, but it's not as overt. You can also adjust the grading scale. Having an individualized rubric or using a standards-based report card that uses a satisfactory or unsatisfactory scale could be very, very helpful to make sure that standards are still met, but again, at their level. There are a few things to consider when implementing a curriculum modification. Don't dumb down the curriculum. So in other words, don't take away the difficult tasks or alter learning expectations too much. Try your best to make sure that you keep rigorous instruction as a goal. Just because something is difficult doesn't mean that it's impossible for a student. Find ways to make sure that the student still gets to at least attempt to access the target skills being taught. Also, don't provide off-grade level material that can interfere with the curriculum sequencing strategy. In other words, don't just pull a book from the library shelf about the civil rights leaders throughout history if you're only focusing on segregation during the Jim Crow era. Instead, find a book, video, or article on their reading level that might help them hit all of the standards pertaining to that target skill, rather than just hitting a target skill in a general sense. Modifications should be used sparingly and with clear justification and approval by the student's academic team. I don't recommend omitting any standards without at least trying to hit the standard in a different, more individualized way. Omitting information overall usually ends up being an issue later down the road. As a reminder, modifications do change the test overall and do change the current level of required proficiency to meet that child's needs. Use them sparingly, but also if you need to use them, just find a way to justify it. Okay. So you may still be wondering, how am I supposed to figure out when to use which one? The best way for me to break it down would be to say this: accommodations alter the how, while modifications alter the what. Accommodations alter how a student learns or presents their understanding. Modifications alter what a student learns or is expected to learn. Take a look at the resources below to test your understanding. Now that we have discussed accommodations and modifications in detail, let's talk about how to communicate their usage with parents and administrators. Accommodating and modifying curriculum, tests, and assignments without an IEP, 504 plan, or clear documentation on tests, report cards, and school records can cause confusion about standard mastery. Always hold a meeting to discuss these curriculum changes first. By holding a meeting, you can discuss what your school's honest limitations are, what is and is not allowed, why certain accommodations or modifications may not be appropriate, and what the weaning process would look like if weaning students off the accommodations or modifications is possible. It's okay if a child requires accommodations or modifications forever. The goal is to do what is best for the child while still making goals and expectations ambitious yet attainable. Also, make sure that you have a documented plan on IEPs, student learning plans, intervention plans, or 504 plans for standardized testing. You never want to leave them off if you have proper documentation and justification for their usage on standardized tests of any kind. In addition to ensuring that the needed accommodations and modifications are documented on IEPs, 504 plans, or intervention plans, make sure that you attach accommodations and modification checklists to all tests or assignments that they were used on. This clearly communicates to everyone what was used. If your school decides that program modifications are necessary for the overall course, also make sure that you have clearly documented this on the child's report card and cumulative records as well. This clearly communicates this to any future schools or teachers. A child's learning journey may not always be smooth, but the steps along the pathway should be intentional and documented. Also remember, by helping the few, you benefit the whole. By creating the accommodations and modifications checklists, key codes on report cards, and even keeping an electronic or physical folder with accommodated and modified tests, projects, assignments, or learning materials, you can help your colleagues, future students, and yourself. If you modify it, make a copy of it. You'll notice that year after year, it'll get easier and easier. Trust me. Special thanks to the Iris Center and Understood.org. These are two great resources you should explore. Thank you for learning with me. If you have any questions or would like to have me present this course to your staff, please contact me at advising@pathwayslearningsolutions.com. Also, visit www.pathwayslearningsolutions.com to learn more about our services and resources. And follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Pathways Learning Solutions.